I'm sure everyone on Earth thinks Mick Mars never needed the spotlight to stand out. He didn't flirt on stage or have sensational romances. However, behind the guitar, always facing the crowd, was a man who had loved, let go, and then calmly moved forward with a lady who came to stay, not to alter him. Nobody expected Mötley Crüe's silent guitarist, who rarely spoke in interviews, avoided personal drama, and almost disappeared from the media, to have such a rich and quietly complex love life. Mick Mars's story is defined by that. A man who had 3 official partnerships, endured illness without complaint, and loved without showing it. His life wasn't decorated with love. He lived to protect rather than possess. He played music and kept silent when someone stayed. Not a scandal or lover list. Despite living in the shadow of fame, a guy let love in without losing his way. Mick Mars may prove that true love doesn't need to be loud in a rock world full of screaming cacophony. It just needs to be quiet enough to last. Before he became Mick Mars, the guitarist behind Mötley Crüe's fiercest riffs, he was Robert Allendale, a boy born in Indiana and raised through a string of relocations as his parents constantly changed jobs. His childhood had no stage, no audience, only loneliness, illness, and the sound of a guitar, the only friend that never left. At 19, while most of his peers were still jamming in garages or dreaming of college, Mick got married to Sharon Deal, a woman outside the entertainment world. They had 2 children together and lived a quiet marriage, so quiet, in fact, that it's nearly invisible in Mötley Crüe's entire biography. No photos, no stories, no scandals. But that was the first chapter in Mick's emotional journey, a time when he chose to be a father, even while unsure he could take care of himself. Back then, he was playing in obscure bands across California, scraping by on tiny gigs, raising children while silently battling the early stages of ankylosing spondylitis, a disease that would later twist and contort his entire body. People often imagine rock stars as creatures of wild love and short-lived passion. But for Mick, his first love wasn't fiery. It was about surviving quietly in a world that had no room for the fragile. And when that marriage fell apart, he said little, no stories, no interviews. One day he simply walked away from his wife, his children, his past, even his own name, and began calling himself Mick Mars. That was the moment a new identity was born. A man who chose to live quietly in a loud world. Who played music not to escape life, but to escape the things he had never been able to name. Feelings, attachments, hope. That's why during Mötley Crüe's early years, no one really knew who this man loved, where he lived, or who he shared his life with. Not because he didn't love, but because he had loved during a time when no one, not even himself, was paying attention. In the 1980s, Mötley Crüe exploded like a storm. Endless tours, hotel rooms turned into war zones, nights spiraling out of control with booze, drugs, and sex. It wasn't just a phase, it was a way of life. And in the thick of that chaos, Mick Mars, the quietest man in the band, fell into a relationship that seemed improbable, yet lasted longer than most of his bandmates' wildest affairs, Emmy Cannon. The fiery backup singer who followed Mötley Crüe through countless tours. Emmy wasn't just another fan, she was part of the chaos Mick was living in, but she was also one of the rare few who saw beyond the blistering guitar riffs, who saw a body in pain, a heart running on empty. In the middle of electrifying shows and blinding lights, Emmy was the one who sat backstage, watching Mick quietly wipe the sweat from his face after sudden back spasms, something he never showed on stage. In 1990, they got married. There was no lavish ceremony, no magazine covers, just a quiet promise between 2 people searching for something to hold onto in a world where everything could fall apart overnight. Emmy became Mick Mars's second official wife and the only woman to fully step into both his musical and personal world during its most brutal phase. But love between 2 artists living in a storm is never easy. As Mick's illness worsened, his joints stiffened, his spine twisted, and the hours standing on stage became agony, he grew more withdrawn. Meanwhile, Emmy, driven by a passion for performance and hungry for growth, began to feel lost. They still loved each other, but no longer resonated on the same frequency. In 1993, they divorced. No lawsuits, no bitterness, no interviews blaming one another. It was simply the end of a chapter. Afterward, Emmy Cannon lived a quiet life far from the limelight. When she passed away in 2017, Mick Mars made no public statement. But years later, in a rare interview, he said one small, deeply mournful sentence. "She was a part of my memory I never wanted to lose, no matter how much it hurts." The love between Mick and Emmy didn't leave behind scandals or legends, but it never faded either. Because it was one of the rare times he let a woman enter his closed-off world, a world without words, without spectacle, but heavy with a loneliness that lingered behind every note he played. Between Mick Mars's two recognized marriages, one with Sharon Deal in his early years and one with Emmy Cannon amid the madness of the 80s, there was a name that never surfaced publicly. A quiet woman, neither a singer nor a model, who never joined him on stage, yet became the mother of Mick Mars's third child. That woman, according to sparse accounts from those close to him, was with Mick for a brief period, perhaps after his first divorce or during the years he retreated from the spotlight. But unlike the romantic chapters often amplified in rock and roll biographies, this relationship was almost entirely erased from official records. No one knows her name, no press photos, not a single quote from Mick Mars. And that was his choice. While other members of Mötley Crüe openly discussed their romantic escapades, even turning them into part of their public personas, Mick chose the opposite path, absolute protection of his private life. In a rare interview, he once said, "Family is something I don't let anyone else write for me." Perhaps that's why his third daughter also grew up away from the spotlight, absent from social media, uninvolved in the music industry. Her connection to her father remained quiet, but not absent. Those close to Mick say he always kept an eye on her, sending gifts, staying in touch, not loudly, not often, but sincerely. Between two eras, one where Mick Mars was entering a phase of worsening illness, and another where the world of rock was changing too fast, that woman and that child are a quiet testament to the fact that some loves and responsibilities don't need to be retold to exist. They are simply there, inseparable from the man's life. Not every relationship needs a wedding ring or a headline. Sometimes the quietest bonds are the most precious, especially for a man like Mick Mars, who has always chosen to live behind the guitar. If Mick Mars's past relationships were marked by responsibility, distance, or prolonged silence, then his relationship with Serena Schwinberger came at a time when no one really expected him to fall in love again. In 2007, during a Motley Crüe concert in Europe, Serena, a Swiss model 34 years younger than Mick, approached him as a fan. But unlike the thousands of admiring glances he had received over the years, her gaze made him pause. Not because of youth nor beauty, but because she didn't come for an autograph, she came to talk. From that meeting, they stayed in touch. Love didn't arrive with the rush of youthful infatuation, but rather through an unusual patience between two very different souls, one who had survived the wildest decade in rock history and one who was still discovering the world with clear, open eyes. They loved without noise. No magazine covers, no red carpets, no polished statements like most Hollywood couples. They simply stayed together. In 2013, Mick Mars and Serena were officially married, in a ceremony so private the press only learned of it months later. There was no lavish party, no exclusive wedding photo deal, no press release, and that's the essence of their bond. Love not meant for public display, but for two people to live as their truest selves. For years afterward, as Mick's illness worsened, daily painkillers just to get on stage, the looming decision to retire from Mötley Crüe, the band he had co-founded and spent half a lifetime with, Serena remained. No statements, no complaints, no tearful interviews. Just small social media posts where she called him my light and a warrior. She didn't try to heal him. She didn't try to change him. She chose to live with an aging, aching, silent man because that was the man who had chosen to love her with no expectations. In a world where love often comes with conditions, showmanship, and the pressure to change, Mick and Serena were like a quiet note, where love no longer asks, "What can this person give me?" but rather, "How long can we walk together?" And Serena stayed as everything else began to leave. When the stage was gone, when the old band turned its back, when his body failed him, when age refused to wait, she still held his hand. No need to hold on to anyone. No need to explain. No need to promise anything. Just be there and keep being there. Mick Mars was never the type of man to write sweet love songs. He didn't compose music for girlfriends, didn't bring them on stage, and never offered the press a perfectly staged romantic photo. To him, love wasn't a sideshow under the glow of rock lights. It was a quiet room where he could shed the artist's skin and simply be human. And Serena, the woman nearly 4 decades his junior, understood that from the very beginning. She didn't come to relive Mick's glory days. She didn't seek fame through marriage to a rock legend. She didn't try to become the healer. She came simply as a companion. No demands, no attempts to control, and most importantly, never making him feel like he had to prove he was still worthy of being loved. There was no unspoken contract between them, no binding through celebrity, no mold of the ideal couple, defined by age or image. She didn't need Mick to pretend to be youthful, strong, or well-matched, and he didn't need her to give up her youth, her light to disappear into a shadow. They accepted each other as whole, both the beauty and the broken. For years, Serena cared for Mick as if he were her whole world, but never for praise. She cooked, read with him, sat beside him through sleepless nights of pain, and waited quietly backstage every time he stepped onto the stage. even as each step grew heavier with time. They had no children together, but shared something more enduring than any blood tie. A peace between two people who didn't need each other to be complete, but chose to walk together through what could no longer be fixed. In an industry where love is often another piece of the brand, where couples are packaged and sold to the public, the story of Mick and Serena runs against the current. A love that doesn't need performance, doesn't need perfect timing, doesn't need to erase differences, only enough respect not to wound each other. And it was precisely when Mick Mars no longer had to play any role, when he could sit in a small room, say nothing, do nothing, and someone stayed by his side without leaving, that he understood. This was real love. The kind you don't have to hold on to, because the other person never intended to let go. Career journey. When people think of Motley Crue, they often picture the thunderous drums of Tommy Lee, the fiery vocals of Vince Neil, or the rebellious energy of Nikki Sixx. But there was one man, always standing toward the back of the stage, not dancing, not running, not needing the spotlight. Who was the solid foundation of it all? Mick Mars, the silent guitarist with riffs so cold, so heavy, and so unmistakably his. Born in 1951, Mick Mars began his career with struggle. Throughout the 1970s, he played in numerous obscure bands across California, changing names, shifting styles, and battling poverty and illness. It was during this time that ankylosing spondylitis began attacking his body, curving his spine, shrinking his height, and stiffening his joints. But instead of giving up, Mick played as if every note was his only defense against the pain. In 1980, he placed a classified ad in the Recycler magazine, describing himself as a loud, rude, and aggressive guitarist willing to do anything to make it. That ad led him to Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee, fellow maniacs with the same dream. Motley Crue was born, and despite being nearly a decade older than the rest, Mick Mars became the anchor of their sound, style, and musical identity. During the 1980s, Mötley Crüe became a global phenomenon with Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, Girls, 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 and Dr. Feelgood. While other members spiraled into drugs, sex, and scandal, Mick quietly stepped on stage each night, playing like it was his last, and left without a word. He didn't party, avoided headlines, but was the only one who showed up on time, practiced religiously, and played with machine-like precision, even while enduring excruciating pain. Though not the band's main songwriter, Mick created some of its most iconic riffs: Kickstart My Heart, Live Wire, Too Fast for Love, defined by simple but powerful techniques blending hard rock, blues, and metal. His playing was never about speed, it was about emotion. Stripped-down menace, and the kind of silence between notes that made listeners hold their breath. But time was not on his side. By the 2000s, his illness had progressed rapidly. Mick relied on heavy pain medication, lost the ability to turn his head, and struggled to move. On many tours, he could only perform with a medical team by his side, yet he never canceled a show. For Mick, the stage was duty, the only way to keep himself from fading away. In 2022, after completing the stadium tour, Mick Mars announced his retirement from touring due to his declining health. The band later stated that John 5 would replace him, but in 2023, Mick shocked fans by filing a lawsuit against Mötley Crüe, accusing them of cutting him out of profits, replacing his live guitar parts without telling him, and treating him as expendable. Lawsuit exposed the darker side of what had appeared to be an unbreakable bond. But more than that, it revealed Mick Mars' uncompromising nature. Even after enduring 40 years in silence, he would not accept being erased while still alive. It wasn't a fight for money. It was a fight to protect the one thing he'd always believed in: loyalty to music. In 2024, Mick Mars released his first-ever solo album, The Other Side of Mars, a musical declaration that was bold, introspective, and undeniably his own. No Mötley Crüe, no hits, no need to prove anything, just his guitar, heavy as stone and quiet as ash. Just like him, Mick Mars never shouted, never demanded to be remembered. But in the hearts of rock fans, he will always be the one who kept the fire burning while everyone else chased the lights. Present life. When Mick Mars officially announced his retirement from Mötley Crüe in 2022, many believed it marked the end of a legend. But to him, it was only the end of a way of living. The rest of his life was what truly mattered. After more than 40 years of playing music through pain, enduring hundreds of nights on tour with a body barely under control, Mick chose to step away. No grand farewell party, no emotional press conference, no applause-seeking gestures. He simply went quiet, stepped out of the spotlight, and returned to a small home, where a woman was waiting. With Serena, he now lives in a peaceful place. No paparazzi, no loud music, no judgment. His days pass slowly, taking medication, practicing finger exercises, composing fragments of new music just for himself, or sometimes sitting in the fading light reading books about physics and spirituality, what he once called the rest of the world that music hasn't touched yet. Sarina remains by his side unchanged, still preparing his meals, taking him to therapy and occasionally sharing glimpses of their daily life, unedited, unposed, without chasing likes. Just two people, one a man who once captivated millions and the other a young woman who chose to love that man even when there was no stage, no spotlight, no upright posture left. Some mornings, neighbors catch sight of Mick sitting in the backyard, holding his guitar, quietly playing an old riff from Too Fast for Love, not for practice, not for recording, just to remind himself that he's still alive, still loves music, and is still loved. In a quiet, complete way that demands nothing in return. No more rock star Mick Mars, no more Mötley Crüe, only a man named Robert living a simple life with a woman he never had to hold on to because she never planned to leave. In that home, everything is real, no stage required. Mick Mars never stepped onto the stage to tell his life story. He never used love as a shield or as a side act. His career, through more than 4 decades of screams, soul-draining tours, and silent battles with illness, he loved in his own way, quietly, steadfastly, without needing praise. He once loved when he was young, with insecurity and a sense of duty. He loved at the height of his fame, with the hope that someone might understand him amid the noise. And finally, he loved someone who asked for nothing except to stay. That love had no lyrics, no catchy chorus, no lead vocals. It was just a foundation, solid, unnoticed. But without it, everything would collapse. Just like Mick Mars himself. He didn't run, didn't show off, didn't fight for the spotlight. But he was the force that held Mötley Crüe together through the decades. Now, he's no longer on stage, no longer forced to play through pain, no longer bound to a band that no longer needs him. But he still has a home, a woman, a guitar, and a kind of love that needs no performance. And maybe in an era where affection is packaged into hashtags and filtered images, Mick Mars's story reminds us of something simple. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It just needs someone quiet enough to stay. And you, what about Mick Mars moves you the most? Is it the quiet power of his music? Or the unwavering loyalty in his love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to join us for more quiet but powerful stories of rock legends. Thank you for watching.